Welcome to the Prospective Doctor Podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Pre-med and medical students alike are encouraged to tune in each week for tips on how to become a strong med school candidate, gain acceptance into the school of your dreams, and succeed on your journey toward residency and becoming a doctor.
Hello, everyone. I'm super excited because we have Med School Coach's very own Chase DiMarco on today. So I'm just going to give him an opportunity to just tell us a little bit about himself in case you guys haven't heard about him on previous episodes or on either of his podcasts.
Well, if they haven't heard of me now, where have they been? What are they doing?
I don't
what are they
know.
listening to?
We're going to go back and listen to everything now after this episode, though.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. or thank you, Erkeda. I don't know where to even begin with this because it's been such a crazy path lately. But all right. So for those that don't know, I am the host of the Medical Mnemonist podcast and the host of the Rounds to Residency podcast, formerly the 1 Minute Preceptor. I still haven't received a change in that plaque yet on my back wall, but hopefully soon. And I guess I started off with FreeMedEd a long time ago, and that was my first semester of med school. That was to collaborate and consolidate free materials. Then I started creating materials, so created an online course, then got into podcasts, blogging, just kind of all over the place. But I know for anyone that really wants a deep dive into those, there's plenty of episodes on my podcast and other previous podcasts. I've done some guest interviews on the Prospective Doctor podcast. Came out with the book, Read This Before Medical School, with some physician colleagues a couple years ago. And now the main point of today's episode is the clinical rotations and research platform, I think. So this will be an interesting one, and we can go into all the hiccups and obstacles that have occurred so far.
But that's the fun part. Like as you've explained, you've been just exploring this world with so many different types of modalities of sharing information that's necessary for students and those in the process and other physicians. So like you mentioned, we're really waiting because you've been talking a lot about this on social media for your newest venture called FindARotation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So it's probably important to note that my entire academic journey has been sort of non-traditional. I didn't have family in medicine or even that really went to college. I think my dad had an associate's degree, and that was the furthest anyone went into academics and higher education. So I've never really known what to do or how to approach academics. I just kind of was winging it all through undergrad and even when I got to medical school. But that also meant that a lot of the time I was using resources or going to schools that were more financial based than prestige based. I started off with community college, then I went to state college, then I took my first graduate degree in an online campus and my second one. And then I went to med school on a Caribbean island. So I've never been in like the top rung academic settings, let's say. But I think that also helped a lot because that, at least for my opinion, it really showed some of the gaps that could be filled. So that's really what all of these entrepreneurial ventures have been for, is to fill in a gap here or there, fill in a gap with online education, fill in a gap with podcasts, fill in the gap with this now service, this platform. And FindARotation really came about when I was completing my fourth year rotations, my final year, my elective rotations, away rotations, whatever you want to call them. And again, coming from a small Caribbean school, not one of the bigger ones that most people know about, but on an island that's literally 3 miles wide by 11 miles long, not a lot of resources there. And when I came back to the US, Caribbean schools, for those that don't know, they're where most American and Canadian students, actually, for that matter, go to when they either don't get into a US or Canadian school, or they don't want to pay the absurd tuition fees, or there's a few other reasons that you might look into it. Mine in particular was I hadn't taken the MCAT at this point, and a friend of mine from undergrad got in, said, you don't need the MCAT here. I'm like, oh, good. That's like 12 months. I don't need to study for this thing. Let's just apply and see what happens. And I ended up getting in. But also when I was doing the rotations, I didn't have a lot of great experiences with the ones the school was setting up. And I really didn't want to complete all of them in the locations that the school had available. I wanted to go to a state that I enjoyed, that I had been to before. And that way I could try to build my own network with the physicians, with the clinics, and hopefully that would increase my chances of getting into a residency in those locations. So I ended up using these rotation agencies, and they work kind of like any other agent. Like a locums tenant has these agencies, or if you have an agent for sports or for actors, they help navigate unfamiliar territory, but they also take a pretty significant chunk of money for doing so, and usually don't have your best interests at heart anyway. At least that was my interpretation from my experiences. And I ended up actually having to prepay for 8 different rotations all at the same time, thousands and thousands of dollars. That was only a small fraction was covered by the school. And then I didn't even get the last couple of them. And there was no refund policy or anything. So that's thousands of dollars just lost. I said, there really has to be a better way to do this. They're not providing any important services, in my opinion. They had the time to form these initial networks, connections with independent physicians or with hospitals and with academic institutions. And that is not something that's really difficult to do, especially in this day and age with the technologies we have. And I know you see my posts on LinkedIn all the time. I mean, that's great for reaching a professional audience. And just like Facebook and Instagram can be great for different audiences. I use them more for students, but there's a lot of physicians on there that I link to and reach out to as well. Every social media platform has its pros and cons. So I said, all right, let's take an example of something that works really well. How about Airbnb? That works really well for getting rid of the need for a lot of real estate agents, really, that might not be providing a service that, that you really need, that you can do on your own. Let's use that model as something we could do for these clinical rotations. So that's basically where the starting point for this was, and that was in 2019. So long path down the road now, 2.5 years. We're on the 3rd version of it right now and still haven't exited beta testing quite. Well, we just got out of beta testing, but the new latest version that actually works the way I want it to is finally coming out, hopefully in the next few weeks. But just so far, there's been a great response for it. I recently gave a presentation on this at the Innovator MD meetup, which is all physicians and entrepreneurs in medical education, in medicine, in healthcare in general. And we have hundreds of students signed up for it just during the beta testing and dozens of physicians already. So I think once we actually have the launch and can do the official marketing and onboarding, it's really going to be very beneficial for everyone involved.
That is a very exciting tale that you just told us. Maybe not as exciting as you were living it, but my goodness, do you have a story to tell? And what I think gets at the heart of it is you did have a non-traditional pathway and you were trying to make these avenues and roads and paths for yourself, and you wanting to give back to others have found a way so that they won't have to go through all of the hurdles that you went through, which is actually quite altruistic and phenomenal. How do you see this new system kind of revolutionizing medical school rotations and that process as we see it now?
Oh, great question, because I'll try not to go on for 20 minutes this time. But so there was already a huge need prior to COVID. And now the pandemic has really just exploded in showing us the gaps and the frailty points that already existed. It really amplified these gaps. And I think this system is going to help so much more for multiple reasons. One, it's not just the Caribbean students anymore, or the DO students as it was in the past, or students from brand new schools that are suffering. Now all students are suffering, and this goes for nursing students, for medical students, for all healthcare students. Because in many states, they're still not allowed in hospitals as we speak, a year and a half later, basically. Yet they're still graduating. They're still moving on with their academic progress. So a lot of students are actually going into getting licensed, going into the healthcare system with only telerotations or with, just basic hands-on experience, not really receiving the clinical experience they need. And I think part of that reason is, at least the research that I did on it so far, is even though the majority of students in some surveys that have been done say that they want to go into some sort of academic medicine when they graduate, when they become physicians. But only about 1/5 actually end up doing it. 80% of active physicians right now in the US are community physicians. They're not academic physicians.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that they don't have valuable lessons to teach, that they don't have skills and even business skills or healthcare skills or other skills that they can give to the students that they can teach. And those are a lot of clinical settings as well that students are not really that experienced in. And I think most students, when they go into medical school initially, at least this is how I thought about it, is I'm thinking more of the family physician. I'm thinking of being a community physician and getting to know the community around me and, really providing extra benefit to them. But as healthcare has really shifted in the past, 10-ish years to focus more on hospitalist medicine, we seem to be losing that in many realms. And I wonder if that's also part of the reason for the increase in burnout is when you have this expectation, but then live this reality, it's just very disappointing. So I think that tapping into this extra resource, this extra 80% of physicians, and giving them the ability to teach students. Now, some do, but most don't have the know-how or maybe the technical skills, or maybe they don't have the time or whatever it is. There's a lot of reasons that they're not going to go through the extra effort to advertise their site, to search for students, to work out scheduling, and then all the documentation that's required by the school and back and forth. It's a lot of work. So this system automates all of that. It's all, drag and drop, click here, click there, e-sign there, and you're done. The calendar is built in, any physician compensation that they require. Some do it for free, but some, it costs them time and effort to teach. So it makes sense to compensate them for that. All of that is already automated in this platform. So we have extra resources we're tapping into. We have easeability. We have the marketing all in one centralized location. I mean, there's really no end to where this can go, but I think it's already going to satisfy a lot of the current gaps. And then hopefully later on, it'll be expanded into some of the more, let's say, higher tier schools and those systems as well.
At Med School Coach, we know that getting into medical school is hard. In fact, 60% of pre-meds who apply to a medical school don't even get accepted. And if you want to get accepted into a top medical school, it's even harder. That's why more students than ever are turning to MCAT tutoring by Med School Coach. Our tutors are all 99th percentile scorers, have been through rigorous training, and can help raise your MCAT score by 12 points or more. You need every competitive advantage you can get to get into med school, so why not get one-on-one tutoring from Med School Coach? Our expert team will create a custom program just for you and help you master MCAT content where you need the help most. You'll raise your MCAT score. We guarantee it. Visit us online at medschoolcoach.com and use offer code PODCAST10 to save 10% up to $400 on a Med School Coach MCAT tutoring package. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and Med School Coach can help.
Wow, that sounds amazing. As someone who was a doctor out in the not affiliated with the school, kind of in the real world, and did enjoy teaching medical students, there were a lot of hurdles that you had to jump through. And I was in an area where there was a school nearby, so was able to kind of filter those students in when I was available. There was a lot of paperwork and things like that, like you mentioned. So kind of taking that onus off of the physician would be phenomenal and probably open up a lot more doors, as well as letting other students, like you mentioned, who may be struggling to find someone who may not be affiliated with their institution, to just give them these options for all of these physicians who are out there just looking to have that extra sense of purpose if they're interested in teaching or helping the next generation of physicians help their practice thrive. Who knows? Some of these students may even be able to work in the practice after they graduate. So you're kind of just helping to evolve the system and increase physicians.
Exactly. And, it's not just for medical students or nursing students. Pre-meds are also looking for shadowing experiences. There's no reason that they can't search on this system as well. Or even graduates that didn't place in residency this year, they might want to build up their CV so they have the opportunity to get a little more experience, maybe gain another letter of recommendation. There is so many benefits to the system. And yes, automating it makes it easier for the preceptor, deals with all of the hardship that normally is associated, so they don't need to worry about it. And there's also extra benefits for physicians depending on their state and their specialty. There's CME credits that might be available. There are tax incentives in certain states. There are teaching recognition awards. There's a lot of different incentives that might help students find more resources here, more preceptors available. And another one would probably be just the limitations within the hospital setting, the academic setting. If a student wants to get into, let's say, a radiology residency, that's pretty difficult. And in fact, that's pretty difficult just to find a clinical rotation in most locations. But now there are community cardiologists, there are community radiologists, there are many specialties that were previously limited to the hospital setting or mostly limited to it that are now practicing in the community. So if they can offer even more varieties of these competitive or rare specialties, then the students have more experience in something that might fit them better. And then they're not just going into residency, blind or thinking they want this, but that's only because they didn't try that or that. So all around, it just seems like it'll make the process a little bit easier.
That makes so much sense. And I can't wait to hear about all of the different people who sign up from listening to this podcast when it comes out. Moving to my next question, you live in quite a transformative space as an entrepreneur, an author, a podcaster. Can you tell us about the process of creating an app in such an innovative market?
Oh boy. Let's see. Well, this goes into many of the hiccups and why it's taken over 2 years of research and development to get where we're at. App development is not easy. We'll start off with that. You can, what is it? You can do it right. You can do it fast, or you can do it cheaper, or whatever that that saying is, pick two.
Mm-hmm.
So most app development, at least in the US, is extremely expensive. The programmers are making like $150 to $200 an hour. And if you have a team of programmers, well, you could see how that builds up quickly. So what's very popular now is that you'll have a US-based owner or salesperson or something. So you're talking to them, you think that it's mostly US-based, or they say it's hybrid and you don't know what that means. They're actually paying like $2 an hour to somebody in India or China or something along those lines. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but there are a lot of obstacles. And that's where my first issue came up. So I found an app development company through when I worked with Inside the Boards. It's a company that they use for their Audio QBank app. And they didn't have any serious issues with the company. So I'm like, okay, well, I have no idea what I'm doing anyway. Let's try them. You've already used them for a few months. Maybe you vetted them. Turns out my app was a lot more complicated. And we spent about a year when the projected deadline was going to be about 3 months. A year later, I still had maybe 70% of an app and it looked like junk. I did not like it at all. So I eventually just said, this is not going anywhere. It hasn't been for months. I can't waste any more time. Got rid of them and found a secondary company. Now, I went through probably 15 interviews before selecting, and I actually found a consultant when I was doing the interviews. Now, his company was going to charge $150 an hour and was projecting the app would be about $150,000 in total or something like that. I'm like, okay, yep, not doing that. And he came back and said, well, I offer consulting as well. So if you'd like, I can help you with the process. And, obviously it's not going to be the $150,000 range type app, but we can really help you. And I have some connections here too. So I ended up using him for quite a while and used a company that he'd used in the past that was from Colombia. They were much better than the first company, but you still have issues with language barriers whenever you're using another company. And it's not just a language barrier, but the technical language versus the creative language is very different. So even if you're both speaking the same language, the ideas person, the brainstormer, is usually going to say things in one way and the engineer is going to say things in a different way.
Absolutely.
It's already very difficult just to get on the same page there. It's like, I'm dreaming this and you're thinking, all right, give me X, Y, and Z. Well, I don't know X, Y, and Z. I'm telling you what I want it to do. You figure it out. And then when you add language barrier on top of it and then time zone differences, it can become quite problematic. We also had the entire team come down with COVID. So for about a month or so, there was no progress there. But then there's the cultural barriers too. Like, this is a pretty intricate concept for someone that doesn't know the healthcare system in the US very well, or even more importantly, the current state of medical education in the US. A lot of physicians don't understand the point of this platform because they don't know how things are right now. It was very different, 15, 20, 30 years ago. And especially if they came from a US medical school and don't understand how the international medical students and foreign medical students, just say IMGs from now on, how that whole process works and how it's changing every year too. I think the last stat I saw was the current US practicing physician workforce is 25% IMGs. So it's not insignificant in any way. But if you don't know those systems, you don't know the cultures, you don't know the languages, you're going to make a lot of grammatical, spelling errors, conceptual errors. So that was round 2, and that's where we went into beta testing, actually, was with that app. But in the end, there were still just too many little things there. It was functional, it could work, but I'm thinking, if I'm a student and I don't know this brand and I come on to this website for the first time, am I going to trust it? Or a physician? And in the end, I said, no, I probably wouldn't. I don't want to risk it. Don't want to start off with a bad reputation or an untrustworthy reputation. So now I'm on the third company. I'm extremely excited about the design so far, and I speak with the lead programmer all the time. He understands the concepts very well. He can explain it to me. He actually offers ideas that I hadn't thought of, or potential hiccups that might arise, potential obstacles. And it's so far it's been great. There's always extra delays, so unfortunately that's just something you have to know. It was supposed to be out a few weeks ago, now it's supposed to be out in a couple of weeks, and now it might be out in a couple of months. You never know. So anytime you're looking into app development, you definitely want to expect that it's going to be anywhere from 50 to 100% more expensive and take 50 to 100% more time than projected, and then you're at least in a kind of a buffer zone.
At Med School Coach, we know that matching into the specialty of your choice and the residency program of your dreams has a dramatic impact on your career as a physician. And your USMLE score is the most important acceptance factor of all. That's why more students than ever are turning to Med School Coach for USMLE tutoring. Our tutors are all 260 plus scorers and have been through rigorous training. Plus, the average student who uses Med School Coach tutoring raises their score by 23 to 55 points. There is an enormous amount of material you need to know for Step 1 and Step 2, and Med School Coach can help you be smart about how to study. We'll create a custom program just for you. Then, we'll help you master USMLE concepts where you need help most. You'll raise your USMLE score. We guarantee it. Visit us online at medschoolcoach.com and use offer code PODCAST10 to save 10% up to $400 on a Med School Coach USMLE tutoring package. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and Med School Coach can help.
That sounds like you have been through quite an ordeal, but I will highlight that you brought up a lot of great points. First of all, I will call it I like to use like acronyms or whatever when I'm talking. So like the 3 Ps. So you have definitely practiced patience with this going for 2 years. You were very persistent in what you wanted and what kind of product you want to present to benefit the entire medical community. And you've been able to pivot. So when things weren't working, you pivoted to another company until you found that right fit. And you've also been trying to figure out how to speak that language, because me, as someone who is a healthcare worker working in the technology field, I can totally identify with us using our medical jargon and all of these kinds of things with someone who is an engineer. They don't match. So you have to figure out how to speak their language. And then it's even more difficult when there are language barriers. So I'm very excited that there's finally something that has met your standards, and we can definitely see what will come of it in order to benefit the students and the preceptors.
Yes, I'm glad. That's a good way to put it, my standards.
You're keeping it to a standard so that people will want to use it and then use it for their next rotation and tell their friends. Because of the quality and the things that you've been contributing to this, you know that it's a good product and it will be very beneficial, instead of just selling them that beta testing, which you could have done, but it wasn't up to your standards.
Yeah, everyone says the MVP, the minimum viable product, but at the same time, healthcare learners and professionals are maybe a little bit more picky than the average consumer.
Absolutely. So with all of that being said, I'm going to ask you, what is one pearl of wisdom that you would like to leave for our listeners?
It's hard to break it down into just one, but I would say, well, like you said, the 3 Ps, and that persistence one is really difficult, especially when things are not going right in other parts of your life, academically, financially, personally. And I've had all of those crash down on me during this whole experience. So that persistence can be very daunting and take a lot of energy. But it also, I guess, just makes the reward so much bigger at the end, that you didn't give up, that you accomplished your goals, and now you can share it with the world. And hopefully it's received in a fairly positive manner, or at least not a negative manner.
I'm sure it will definitely be received quite positively, especially after the year we've had with the pandemic. A lot of students are in need of something to help them get through this, as well as some of the physicians in the community are looking for more things to kind of keep them going. So I think that it'll be a great marriage of the two, and it'll definitely help a lot of people.
I definitely hope so.
How can people look? I know you said that it's not ready yet and it should be coming soon, but if someone were interested in FindARotation, how can they find more information about it, and where can they find out when it comes out?
Yeah, I mean, we're FindARotation on any social media platform. Feel free to like, share, follow all of those. And FindARotation.com is where the current website is. And we do have some informative materials up there, some really interesting blog posts and guidance for those interested in clinical research or clinical rotations, because we do offer research on the platform as well as sort of a type of rotation. We're trying to build out later on institutional settings, housing. So if students are traveling for the rotations, there'll be housing involved. But FindARotation.com is the place to bookmark right now. Put it in your Chrome bookmark, put it in your phone bookmark, and check back regularly, and we'll post it on social media. And if you join the mailing list on our contact list, then we can also notify you with that.
Absolutely. That sounds like something you definitely need to bookmark right after you subscribe to this podcast, The Prospective Doctor, and our other podcasts on Med School Coach. And we'll definitely place a link for the website on the show notes here. So I'll give Chase an opportunity to say goodbye. I'm sure he'll be back again soon once it comes live. And maybe we'll take some student questions from social media like we've done before. So definitely email us or go on our Instagram at Med School Coach and let us know what burning questions you have.
Yeah, that'd be great. Let's get a list of questions. I'll come back and answer them to the best of my ability.
Perfect. Thanks so much for coming again. And for all the listeners out there, I'll see you next week.
Each episode of the Prospective Doctor podcast is brought to you by Med School Coach. To access articles, videos, webinars, and free tools to help you succeed on your journey toward medical school and beyond, visit our website, prospectivedoctor.com. We hope you tune in again next time.